The vastness of space stretched out before Captain Harris and the crew of the Vanguard. The stars, distant and cold, flickered like scattered diamonds in the endless dark. The crew, all seasoned veterans of war, knew this quiet was deceiving. They had fought in battles across countless star systems, and though this calm seemed peaceful, they knew trouble always lurked just beyond the horizon. It was on this quiet night that the call came. It started as a faint hum in the communication system, so subtle that for a moment no one noticed it. But then it grew, its urgency impossible to ignore. Lieutenant Rosa, the communications officer, leaned forward in her seat, her fingers flying across the control panel. "Captain," she said, her voice steady but tense, "I'm getting an SOS signal. It's weak, but it's there." Captain Harris, sitting in the command chair, immediately straightened. Her mind raced. An SOS was not uncommon. Ships sent distress signals all the time in the dangerous corners of the galaxy. But this one felt different. The tone was desperate, full of fear. "Can you get a location?" Harris asked. Rosa's eyes flickered over the readouts. "It's coming from an uncharted planet. Coordinates match nothing we've encountered before." She paused for a moment, studying the data. "It's not even on any of the known star maps." Harris felt a chill run down her spine. Uncharted territory meant unknown risks. The unknown was a dangerous place to be for even the most experienced crews. She glanced at her tactical officer, Commander Kale, who was already analyzing the signal's frequency. "Could be a trap," Kale muttered, his voice low and gruff. "We've seen this before. Fake distress signals to lure ships into ambushes." "Maybe," Harris replied. "But it could also be something else. Something worse. Either way, we can't just ignore it." She turned her attention to the rest of the bridge crew. Dr. Lyon, the ship's science officer, was already pulling up the planet's orbital data. The planet itself was a mystery, with no recorded history or encounters. No known alien species had ever claimed it as their home, nor had any ships ever traveled near it. "What's the planet like?" Harris asked Lyon. "It's odd," Lyon replied, studying the holographic display. "The surface is mostly covered in oceans and dense jungles. There's no sign of advanced civilization, but the atmospheric readings suggest something unusual, something that could support life, but not the way we're used to." "Could it be another Deathworld?" Harris asked, her voice careful. Deathworlds were planets so hostile that only the toughest species could survive. Most of the galaxy avoided them, as they were deadly, unpredictable places. But sometimes there were exceptions. "No," Lyon said, shaking her head. "It's not a Deathworld, but it's close. There's a strange energy signature coming from the planet's core. If I didn't know better, I'd say it was a distress signal on its own. Something is wrong down there, Captain." The tension on the bridge grew thick. Every crew member felt it, the sense that this was no ordinary mission. There was danger in that SOS, and the unknown energy beneath the planet's surface was enough to raise alarms. Harris exhaled slowly. The decision before her was not an easy one. Responding to a distress signal was one thing. Responding to an unknown planet in an uncharted system with mysterious energy readings was something else entirely. There were risks, massive risks. But that was why they were here, wasn't it? The crew of the Vanguard was no ordinary crew. They were Deathworlders, battle-hardened and unafraid to face whatever challenges the universe threw at them. They had fought in wars against alien races and survived against the odds. They had been through hell and back, and they weren't about to turn their backs on a plea for help. "Set a course for the planet," Harris ordered, her voice steady. "We can't ignore this. We'll investigate the signal and see what's going on down there." Rosa nodded and began inputting the coordinates. The hum of the engines intensified as the Vanguard began to move, cutting through the blackness of space, heading toward the unknown. As the ship pushed forward, Harris couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She didn't know what it was, but her instincts were telling her that they were walking into something far more dangerous than they realized. Minutes passed, then hours. The stars outside the viewports blurred as they entered a region of space that felt different. The planet was getting closer, and the atmosphere on the bridge grew heavier. The crew worked in tense silence, each person acutely aware of the danger they were heading into. Suddenly, a loud beep echoed from the console. It was Rosa's voice again, now filled with urgency. "Captain, the signal just changed. It's becoming more distinct. It's no longer just a distress signal. It's almost like it's calling us." Harris's heart skipped a beat. "Calling us." Rosa nodded, her fingers dancing across the controls. "Yes, Captain. It's almost as if it's targeting our ship. It's asking for something. Or someone." The unease in Harris's gut deepened, a distress signal that wasn't just asking for help, but seemed to have a specific target. That wasn't a good sign. "Prepare for landing," Harris ordered, her voice tight. "We're going in." The Vanguard entered the planet's atmosphere, its hull vibrating slightly as the ship descended. The alien world below them appeared eerie and quiet, the dense jungle stretching far below. There was no sign of life, no movement. It was as if the planet was holding its breath, waiting. The crew held their breath too. What waited for them on this strange world? And more importantly, who or what had sent that call for help? Harris couldn't shake the feeling that this mission was just the beginning of something much darker. And as they touched down on the planet's surface, the true nature of the distress signal and the danger it promised was about to unfold. The Vanguard slowly descended through the thick, swirling clouds of the alien planet. The atmosphere was dense with moisture, making it difficult for the ship's sensors to get a clear read of the land below. The ship shuddered slightly as it made its way down, cutting through the turbulence. Captain Harris stood in the command chair, her hands clasped tightly behind her back. The uneasy silence of the bridge was deafening as the crew waited for the final confirmation. Every decision made now would determine the future of this mission, and possibly the fate of everyone on board. "Captain," Commander Cale spoke, his voice gravelly, as he monitored the tactical systems. "If this is a trap, we won't make it. We don't know what we're walking into down there." The distress signal's sudden change, the planet's odd energy readings, everything about this feels wrong. The warning in Cale's voice was clear. He was a man who had fought in countless battles, seen things that most would never dare imagine. And he was cautious. Caution was what had kept them alive all these years. Captain Harris turned to face him. "I know, Cale, but if this is a trap, then we'll handle it. We've faced traps before, and we've always come out on top. What I'm more concerned about is the possibility that someone, or something, truly needs help." Cale didn't argue, but his expression tightened. "And if it's not a trap, what then? The planet's uncharted. No records. And these energy disturbances are unlike anything we've encountered. It's almost as if the planet itself is calling for help, not just the signal." Harris nodded. She had been thinking the same thing. The energy readings were unsettling. Something in the planet's core was emitting a strange signature, one that didn't match any known patterns. It felt alive, almost sentient. But they didn't have enough information to fully understand it. "Then we'll find out what it is," Harris replied, her voice firm. "We're not just a military vessel, Cale. We're here to protect. If there are beings on that planet who need us, we'll answer their call. But we'll do it carefully. We don't take unnecessary risks." She turned to Dr. Lyon, who was monitoring the planet's surface and atmospheric conditions. "What's the surface like, Lyon? Can we land without too much trouble?" Lyon glanced at the holographic display before her. "It's difficult to say, Captain. The planet has a dense jungle covering most of the surface, but there are patches of open land. I would advise against landing too close to any of the dense forest regions. They might be too unstable. There could be hazards we're not seeing." The crew fell silent for a moment. the weight of the decision hanging in the air. It wasn't just about survival, it was about the unknown. They were stepping into a situation that no one had ever anticipated. But that was the nature of exploration and discovery. "Prepare to land," Harris said, her voice a mixture of resolve and concern. "We'll set down on the open plains. We'll stay on high alert. Kale, I want a full tactical scan of the area before we touch down. Lion, keep monitoring the energy signature. And Rosa, stay on communications. I want to know if anything changes down there." "Aye, Captain," came the chorus of replies. As the crew carried out their orders, Harris watched the planet's surface grow closer through the viewport. It looked peaceful from a distance, almost serene. But Harris knew better. No planet was ever truly peaceful, not when there was an SOS involved. The Vanguard shook once more as it pierced the planet's atmosphere. There were flashes of lightning in the clouds above, lighting up the sky in violent streaks. The planet seemed alive, almost as if it were warning them to turn back. But it was too late for that now. They had made their choice. Below, the planet's surface looked even more alien. The jungle stretched far and wide, their dense canopies blocking out much of the sunlight. But the plains where the Vanguard was about to land seemed open, devoid of any large obstructions. There were no signs of life, at least none that the sensors could detect. "Touchdown in 3 minutes," Rosa announced. "Understood," Harris replied. "Commander, I want your team on the ground first. We need to secure the area. I'll take a small team with me. Dr. Lyon, Lieutenant Rosa, and you, Kale." The tactical officer grunted in acknowledgement. "Understood, Captain. We'll move out as soon as we're on the ground." The Vanguard made a final descent, and the ship's landing thrusters activated with a soft roar. There was a slight jolt as the ship's massive hull made contact with the surface. The ground beneath them was soft but firm, like a dense, untouched meadow. The ship's legs lowered, securing them in place. The crew immediately moved into action. Harris gathered her team near the exit, her heart racing as she felt the weight of the moment. The air inside the Vanguard felt charged, electric, as though the planet itself were holding its breath, waiting for them to step out. "Stay sharp," Kale said as he adjusted his blaster. "We don't know what we'll find down there." The doors to the Vanguard opened with a hiss, revealing the alien world outside. The air was thick, humid, and smelled faintly of unfamiliar plants. The jungle loomed just beyond the open plain, dark and full of mystery. The sky above was overcast, heavy with clouds, making the atmosphere feel even more oppressive. "Let's move," Harris said, stepping out onto the alien soil. Her boots sank slightly into the soft earth, but she quickly regained her footing. As she led her team forward, the sound of their footsteps was the only noise in the otherwise silent landscape. For a moment, the crew just stood there, taking in the surroundings. The tall grass and strange, twisted trees gave the area an almost surreal quality. The air was thick with moisture, and yet there was no sign of life, no movement. It was as if the planet was empty. But Harris couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every step they took seemed to echo in the vast silence. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and she found herself glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see something. Anything. Move. "We're not alone here," Kale muttered under his breath, his hand still on his weapon. Harris nodded. "Keep your eyes open. Stay close." As they moved further into the unknown, the signal, the distress signal, grew stronger, louder in their earpieces. It was almost as if the planet was calling them, urging them deeper into its mysterious heart. But what was waiting for them? And who, or what, had sent that call for help? The Vanguard's landing was smooth, but as the crew moved further from the ship, the alien planet revealed its eerie, unnerving quiet. The jungle stretched on both sides, their thick trees casting long shadows under the overcast sky. The air was heavy with humidity, and every step they took seemed muffled by the dense foliage beneath their boots. The distress signal was stronger now, a constant pulse that seemed to vibrate the very air around them. Captain Harris kept her hand on the hilt of her sidearm, her sharp eyes scanning every corner of the landscape. The jungle was too still. She knew from experience that this kind of silence was unnatural. It was the kind of stillness that could only be broken by something dangerous. Yet she could not let her suspicion cloud her judgment. They had a job to do, and the SOS had been clear. There were lives to save. "Keep your heads on a swivel," Harris ordered, her voice low but firm. "Something's off about this place." Commander Cale grunted in acknowledgement, his heavy boots crunching the ground beneath him as he led the way through the thick undergrowth. Dr. Lyon, the ship's science officer, was closely examining the unusual flora around them. Strange, bioluminescent plants flickered in the dim light, their soft glow pulsating like distant stars. The jungle was alive in its own way, but it felt foreign, unwelcoming. "What are you seeing, Lyon?" Cale asked, his voice tight, as he scanned the area with his rifle. "There's a strange chemical signature in the air," Dr. Lyon replied, her face furrowing with concern. "The plant life seems to be producing some kind of pheromone. It's unlike anything we've seen before. It could be affecting the air's composition or the local atmosphere." "Could it be dangerous?" Harris asked, her voice low. "I don't think so," Lyon said, "but we need to keep an eye on it. These plants, they're not native to any known systems. Whatever's happening here is unlike anything we've encountered." The distress signal was growing clearer by the minute, a steady rhythm that called them deeper into the jungle. The closer they got, the stronger the pulse became. Harris felt it in her bones, a constant, low hum that seemed to beckon them forward, urging them to follow. They pressed on, moving cautiously but steadily. The thick underbrush scraped against their clothes, and the jungle felt alive around them. The shadows stretched longer as they made their way deeper into the heart of the planet, but there was still no sign of movement, no sign of life beyond the eerie quiet. As they walked, Harris felt an odd unease settle in her gut. It was as if the very ground beneath her feet was watching them, waiting. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. "Hold up," Cale suddenly said, holding up his hand to stop the group. "I'm picking something up." The crew immediately froze. Cale's sharp eyes narrowed as he scanned the area with his sensors. "I've got a heat signature ahead. Moving fast. No identification." The tension on the ground tightened in an instant. No one spoke, but the air around them seemed to thicken with anticipation. Something was coming. "Get ready," Harris whispered, motioning for everyone to take cover. The team quickly scattered, finding hiding spots behind the dense vegetation. Cale crouched low, his weapon drawn and ready. Lyon took cover behind a thick tree, clutching a small scanning device as she analyzed the unknown signature. Rosa, always calm under pressure, checked her communication equipment, ensuring the Vanguard could still monitor their movements. Seconds ticked by like hours, the only sound the low hum of the distress signal and the faint rustling of the jungle. Then, out of the undergrowth, a shape emerged. It was humanoid in shape, but unlike any species they had encountered. The creature was tall, easily over 7 feet, its skin a mottled mix of greens and browns, blending almost seamlessly with the surrounding jungle. It was thin, but its muscles were taut, built for speed and strength. Its face was partially obscured by a mask-like feature that made it difficult to determine its exact nature. 2 glowing eyes, yellow and sharp, flickered in the dim light, locking onto the team. The creature moved swiftly, its movements almost predatory. Yet there was something else in its eyes, an intensity that could only be described as desperation. "Stay back," Harris commanded, her voice commanding as she stepped forward, weapon in hand. The creature froze, its glowing eyes never leaving her. For a moment, there was an eerie silence. Then the creature spoke, its voice deep, guttural, and almost strained. "Help. Me." The words were almost lost in the strange, thick accent of the alien being, but they were unmistakable. The creature was asking for help. It was the very thing they had come for. Cale shifted his position, eyeing the alien warily. "What is it?" Harris didn't lower her weapon. Instead, she took another step forward, her expression serious. "Who are you? What do you need help with?" The creature's eyes flickered with something like fear, or perhaps hope. "The signal. Sent you. To save. Others." Harris's heart skipped a beat. "Others?" She glanced back at Cale, then at Dr. Lyon. "What's going on here?" The alien's voice faltered, then it looked over its shoulder, its glowing eyes scanning the jungle as if waiting for something. "The signal. We are not alone. They are coming." The air grew colder, and the hairs on the back of Harris's neck stood up. The creature seemed to be waiting for something, expecting something to happen. And as the seconds dragged on, Harris could feel it too, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. The ground beneath their feet trembled slightly, a distant rumble that grew louder and louder. The jungle, once still, began to stir, and Harris could see shadows moving just beyond the tree line. She wasn't sure what it was, but it was coming. Something dangerous. "Get ready," she ordered again, signaling for the team to fall into defensive positions. The creature, now seemingly more anxious, reached out toward Harris. Its hand was trembling slightly, the long, slender fingers grasping at the air. "You must hurry. They will come soon. You must stop them." Harris didn't hesitate. "What's coming? What are you talking about?" The creature's eyes flickered toward the jungle again, its breath quickening. "The hunters," it said in a low, almost defeated voice. "They are here for us. They are here to take all of us." A chill ran down Harris's spine. The creature's words were chilling, but they also brought a sense of clarity. Whatever was about to happen, it wasn't going to be just a rescue mission anymore. They had walked into something much bigger, something far more dangerous. And now, the real test would begin. The distant rumble grew louder, a deep, resonant growl that seemed to shake the very air around them. The alien creature, now visibly trembling, backed away, its eyes wide with fear. It had spoken of hunters, but Harris could feel it now. Something was coming, something dangerous. "Everyone, stay sharp," Harris ordered, her voice steady despite the growing tension. "We don't know what we're up against." The rest of the team moved into a defensive formation, weapons raised and scanning the jungle with caution. Cale, ever the tactician, was already looking for escape routes, calculating how much time they had before the inevitable confrontation. Dr. Lyon, usually calm and composed, seemed visibly unsettled, her hands shaking as she checked the readings on her scanner. "Captain," Lyon said, her voice strained, "the energy readings are spiking. Whatever's causing that rumble, it's not natural. I'm picking up multiple signatures, but they're not humanoid. There's something else." "Something else," Harris repeated, her brow furrowing. Lyon didn't answer immediately, her eyes glued to the scanner, her mind racing to make sense of the data. I can't get a clear read on them, but they're large, and they're moving fast. It's like they're tracking us." The alien creature, still watching the tree line nervously, spoke again, its voice now urgent and hoarse. "They are coming. The hunters. Silent. Deadly. They track us by scent, by sound. We cannot hide from them. You must run." Harris's gaze hardened. She wasn't going to run. Not yet. Not without answers. "We're not leaving," she said firmly, her eyes meeting Cale's. "Get the perimeter set up. Everyone else, stay close." Cale nodded without a word, moving to take the lead as he checked his weapon again, preparing for whatever was to come. The air was thick with tension as the rumbling grew louder. The jungle around them, once still, began to stir, the distant trees shaking as if disturbed by some unseen force. Then, all at once, the jungle went eerily quiet again. It was the kind of silence that seemed unnatural, like the calm before a storm. The crew tensed, every nerve on edge, waiting for the first sign of movement. Suddenly, there was a sound, a low guttural growl that seemed to come from all directions. It was deep, primal, and full of menace. The jungle seemed to shift, the dense vegetation parting in places as if something large was pushing through. "It's here," Cale muttered, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the jungle. And then they saw it. Emerging from the shadows, a large, sleek figure stepped into view. It was a creature unlike anything Harris had ever seen. Its body was covered in dark, almost translucent scales that shimmered in the dim light, its muscular frame long and predatory. Its eyes glowed with a cold violet light, and its mouth was filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. The creature's movements were fluid and graceful, as if it was more shadow than substance. It was fast, faster than anything Harris had ever encountered. Before she could react, it leaped forward, its sharp claws outstretched, heading straight for the alien they had been speaking with. "No," Harris shouted, raising her weapon and firing a quick burst. The shot hit the creature, but it barely flinched. It didn't slow down, it just kept coming. Cale fired next, his shots landing with more precision, but still, the creature seemed undeterred. It was too fast, too strong. Before they could react, the creature closed the distance, slamming into the alien, knocking it to the ground with terrifying force. "Get down," Harris ordered, diving to the side as more creatures emerged from the jungle, each one more terrifying than the last. They were everywhere, slithering, running, and stalking through the trees, their eyes glowing in the dark. These were the hunters the alien had warned them about, but they weren't just hunting prey. They were hunting them. The team opened fire, but the creatures were too quick, too agile. Their movements were almost impossible to track, and every shot seemed to go wide. Harris gritted her teeth, realizing that this wasn't just a simple fight for survival. It was a battle against something far more deadly than anything they had faced before. "Fall back to the Vanguard," Cale shouted, firing another round as one of the creatures darted past him. His shots were too far behind, the creature already moving too fast for them to hit. "We can't outrun them," Lion cried out, her voice shaking. "We need a better plan." Harris glanced toward the Vanguard, the ship sitting just beyond the tree line. It seemed so far away, too far. And the creatures were closing in, moving with terrifying speed and precision. There was no way they could make it back to the ship safely. Not unless they changed the game. "Cover me," Harris shouted as she began moving toward a nearby boulder, her weapon still in hand. She knew it was a gamble, but they had to do something. There was no way they were going to survive just standing there, firing at creatures they couldn't touch. As she sprinted across the open space, she could hear the sound of claws scraping against the ground, the growls getting louder, closer. Her heart pounded in her chest, adrenaline flooding her system. She didn't look back. Behind her, Cale and Rosa covered her retreat, firing off shots at the creatures as they tried to close in. Dr. Lion stayed behind, using her equipment to scan the creatures, trying to find a weak spot, any advantage they could use. But Harris could feel the weight of the situation. The longer they'd fought, the more overwhelmed they would become. They needed to get out of the jungle and fast. The alien, now regaining its footing, let out a loud pain scream as another of the creatures lunged at it, tearing into its flesh with horrifying speed. It was the last scream they would hear from it. The creature was gone. "Captain," Cale shouted urgently, "we can't keep this up much longer." Harris reached the boulder and dove behind it, taking cover just as the first creature lunged in her direction. She fired quickly, her shots aimed at the creature's head, but it dodged, moving faster than a predator should. She cursed under her breath. "We need to get them away from the ship," Harris said, her voice grim. She knew this would be a fight for survival, not just for her team, but for every living soul on the Vanguard. But the jungle had already closed in around them, and the hunters were getting closer. The fight was only just beginning. The jungle erupted into chaos as the deadly creatures closed in. Harris's pulse raced, her breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. She pressed herself against the boulder, trying to steady her aim as one of the creatures lunged for her. Its glowing violet eyes locked onto her, its razor-sharp claws gleaming in the dim light as it leaped forward. "Captain, move," Cale yelled, his voice full of urgency. Harris didn't need to be told twice. She rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the creature's swipe, and quickly regained her footing. The jungle around them seemed alive with the hunters, their presence felt in every rustle of leaves and every growl that echoed through the air. Cale, Rosa, and Lion were holding their ground, firing shots as fast as they could. But the creatures were faster, too fast. They darted in and out of the shadows, their movements so fluid and unpredictable that the team struggled to track them. Every shot they fired seemed to miss, and the creatures weren't just attacking the alien. Now they were after all of them. "This isn't working," Harris muttered to herself, her fingers trembling on the trigger. The creatures were relentless, and it was becoming clear that their weapons weren't going to be enough. They needed a plan, a real one, and fast. "Lian, can you use the ship's comms to find any kind of backup?" Cale shouted over the chaos, his rifle jerking with every shot. Lion's face was pale as she worked frantically with her equipment. "I'm trying, but the signal's too weak. Whatever these creatures are, they're jamming our frequencies." Harris's eyes darted around. The jungle was closing in on them from all sides, and the creatures were getting bolder. The momentary hesitation she had felt earlier was gone now. They were being hunted, and they were running out of time. The first hunter came at her again, its claws extended and aimed for her throat. But this time, she was ready. She fired a quick burst, hitting the creature square in the chest. It recoiled, hissing in pain, but didn't go down. Instead, it snarled, its glowing eyes filled with malice. "You have to do better than that," Harris growled under her breath, charging forward, her weapon raised. She had no choice but to fight back with everything she had. But just as the creature lunged, something unexpected happened. There was a sudden, explosive roar from the jungle, louder than anything they'd heard before. The ground shook beneath their feet as something massive barreled through the trees, breaking through the thick foliage with an almost unnatural speed. The creatures paused for a split second, their heads snapping toward the source of the sound. The silence that followed was almost as terrifying as the creatures themselves. Harris's heart skipped a beat as she peered into the jungle, trying to make sense of what was happening. The creatures who had been relentless moments ago now seemed uncertain. They shifted, their glowing eyes scanning the trees with a mix of fear and curiosity. "What the hell is that?" Cale muttered, his weapon still raised, but his focus on the massive shape now emerging from the shadows. Through the dense trees, a colossal creature appeared, its massive frame moving with surprising grace for something so large. It was unlike any of the hunters, its body covered in thick, armored plating. Its eyes glowed a deep red, and its massive jaws opened wide, revealing rows of sharp teeth that could easily crush a human skull. But it wasn't attacking. Not yet. The hunters scattered as it roared, the sound echoing through the jungle, sending a wave of fear through the smaller creatures. It was like they recognized the danger, like they knew the creature was a threat they couldn't handle. "That's no ordinary predator," Lion whispered, her eyes wide. It's massive." Harris didn't wait. She knew the moment the creature's roar had echoed through the jungle. Things had shifted. The hunters were no longer the only threat. Now they had to deal with something even more dangerous. "We can't wait around," Harris said, her voice steady as she turned to her team. "We need to move. Now." They turned as one, breaking for the clearing where the Vanguard awaited. Every step felt like an eternity, the jungle around them alive with the sounds of the hunters and the massive creature in pursuit. They didn't have much time before the situation became even worse. As they sprinted toward the clearing, Cale yelled back at Harris. "They're still on us. We need a way to stop them." Harris didn't answer immediately. She was focused, her mind racing. The Vanguard wasn't just their escape route, it was their only hope. But they couldn't afford to run blindly into it without a plan. They needed to shake the creatures off, and fast. Ahead, the Vanguard loomed, its sleek form cutting through the dense jungle. But between them and safety, the massive creature stood in their path, roaring once more, shaking the ground beneath them. The hunters seemed to hesitate, unsure of what to do. Some of them circled the massive creature, but others seemed to retreat, their eyes watching the beast with wariness. "We've got to take our chances," Harris said, determination in her voice. "On my mark. Cale, Rosa, get ready to distract the creatures. Lion, stay close to me. We're going to make a run for the Vanguard." Lian nodded, gripping her scanner tightly. "What about that thing?" she asked, glancing at the giant creature now blocking their path. "We deal with it as we go," Harris said, her voice hard. "We can't afford to stop." Cale and Rosa quickly positioned themselves, preparing to draw the attention of the hunters. Harris didn't wait for them to finish their plan. She set off first, her eyes locked on the Vanguard ahead, her heart pounding in her chest. The rest followed, their movements quick and calculated, with Cale and Rosa drawing the attention of the hunters away just long enough for Harris and Lion to get closer to the ship. But as they neared, the massive creature let out another roar, charging at them. It was coming for them, and there was no turning back now. The jungle seemed to tremble as the massive creature charged, its huge form shaking the ground with every step. Harris's heart raced, and she could hear the pounding of her own pulse in her ears as she sprinted toward the Vanguard, the only hope for escape. The hunters, still hesitant but hungry for blood, circled around, their glowing eyes locked on their prey. But the bigger creature, the one they'd all feared, was on the move, and it was coming for them. Harris pushed herself harder, feeling the strain in her muscles, but she couldn't afford to slow down. Every second mattered. The Vanguard was within reach, but the jungle between them and the ship had never felt wider. "Cale, Rosa," Harris shouted, her voice hoarse as she glanced over her shoulder. "Distract them. Keep them away from the ship." Cale and Rosa moved into position, their rifles raised, but it was clear the hunters were already in pursuit. The giant creature behind them roared again, a sound so loud it reverberated through the trees and the ground beneath their feet. It was like a warning, a challenge to the smaller hunters who were still circling. But the distraction came too late. The ground vibrated once more, and out of the corner of her eye, Harris saw the first of the smaller creatures darting toward her. "Damn it." Harris gritted her teeth, slamming her hand against the comm on her wrist. "Lian, get to the ship. I'll cover you." Lian nodded, her face pale but determined. "I'm with you, Captain." They reached the clearing just as the first of the smaller creatures lunged, sharp claws outstretched. Harris fired, the shot catching the beast in the side, but it barely seemed to notice. It kept coming. She couldn't stop them all. They had to keep moving, or they'd be overwhelmed. Just ahead, the Vanguard gleamed, its engine still idle, waiting. But between them and safety stood the wall of jungle and the massive creature. The ship felt miles away. "Keep moving," Harris shouted again, her weapon firing in quick bursts at the approaching creatures, forcing them back for a moment. She didn't have time to check if her shots hit. She didn't have time for anything but survival. Her team needed to make it to the Vanguard. They needed to make it back to safety. Covering fire. Cale yelled from the rear, his shots ringing out as the hunters hesitated, forced to deal with the distraction. Harris knew that every moment they held off the creatures was one step closer to survival. The Vanguard was just within reach now. They were almost there. And then, it happened. The massive creature let out a bone-shaking roar that filled the air, louder than anything they had heard before. It was charging, faster than any of them could have predicted. Harris didn't look back, but she could hear the ground shaking beneath its mighty footsteps. It was coming for them, its eyes glowing red with rage, its mouth open wide, ready to tear them apart. "We're not going to make it," Lion cried out, her voice rising in panic as she sped toward the Vanguard. Harris's mind raced. They needed to get to the ship. They needed to buy themselves more time, or they would never make it. "Kale, Rosa," Harris shouted, "we need to slow it down." Kale fired once more, but it wasn't enough. The creature was too fast, too powerful. It was already closing the gap, and they could see the claws gleaming in the dim light, ready to rip through anything that got in its way. The Vanguard was so close, but it wasn't close enough. And then, a new sound broke through the air, another roar. But this one was different. It wasn't the sound of the massive creature, nor the hunters. It was the sound of something large, something powerful, and it was coming from the Vanguard. The ship's engines roared to life, sending a shockwave through the jungle. Harris could see the ship's defensive turrets rising, locking onto the massive creature. The ship was armed, heavily armed, and it was no longer waiting. Before Harris could react, the Vanguard's turrets fired, a series of blasts that lit up the sky. The massive creature howled in pain as the shots hit it squarely in the chest. It stumbled, its massive frame faltering for just a second. "Move. Now," Harris screamed, her voice breaking as the team surged forward. They couldn't waste any more time. The ship was ready to fight, but they needed to get inside. They ran, pushing themselves harder than they ever had before. Behind them, the creature screamed in fury, but it was already retreating. The defensive fire from the Vanguard had given them just enough time to reach the ship's hatch. Harris and Lion reached the ramp first, barely making it inside as the ship's doors began to close. Kale and Rosa were right behind them, the sound of their heavy boots pounding against the metal ramp as it began to rise. "Get to the cockpit," Harris ordered as she pressed a hand against the side of her face, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Prepare for takeoff." The ship's interior hummed to life as the ramp sealed, and the engines began to warm up. The defensive turrets continued to fire, the sounds of explosions and roars filtering through the walls of the ship. But it wasn't enough. They couldn't outrun the jungle forever. "We're not out of this yet," Harris muttered, her voice low as she glanced over at Kale. "Take us up." Now. Without hesitation, Kale moved to the pilot's seat, his fingers flying over the controls. The Vanguard jerked, the engines roaring to life as the ship lifted off the ground, rising above the jungle and into the air. They could still hear the sound of the creature's roar fading behind them, but Harris knew it wasn't over. Not yet. As the Vanguard broke through the trees, the dark sky opened up before them, stars stretching across the endless void. The jungle, the hunters, the massive creature, they were all behind them. But the danger wasn't gone. Harris knew this was only the beginning. "Set a course for home," Harris said, her voice grim as she turned toward her team. "We've survived for now, but we need to regroup. We need to be ready. They're not done with us yet." As the Vanguard shot into the stars, Harris couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still to come. The Vanguard soared through the stars, leaving the alien jungle far behind. Yet, despite the distance, the tension inside the ship was palpable. Harris sat in the cockpit, staring out at the endless expanse of space. Her mind was still racing, her heart pounding as if they had never truly escaped the danger. They had made it out alive, but they all knew this was just the beginning. Behind her, Lion, Kale, and Rosa were seated in the crew's quarters, quietly nursing their wounds. Their faces were drawn, tired, but relieved. For now, they were safe. But the heavy feeling in the air told a different story. The horrors of the jungle, the hunters, the massive creature, had left scars, both visible and invisible. And there was one question that lingered in the air, unanswered. "What now?" Lion whispered, breaking the silence as she entered the cockpit. Harris turned to face her. Lion's face was streaked with dirt and exhaustion, but there was a fire in her eyes, a determination that Harris admired. She stood up, stepping over to the navigation console. The stars outside were cold and silent, but they could feel the weight of the unknown pressing in. "We regroup. We analyze what happened," Harris replied, her voice steady, but there was a steel edge to it. "We need to prepare for what's coming next." Lian nodded, her eyes scanning the control panel as the ship hummed steadily through space. They had escaped for now, but their mission wasn't over. If anything, it had only grown more complicated. The distress signal had led them to that jungle, and while they had rescued the vulnerable species on the planet, they had also unleashed something far more dangerous. "Captain," Kel's voice came through the comm. "You might want to see this." Harris raised an eyebrow, but nodded to Lan. "Get us on a secure frequency, Lan." The screens flickered as Lian worked her way through the ship's communication system. A moment later, a holographic image of Kale appeared, his face serious. "We've received a signal. It's from the planet." Harris froze, a chill running down her spine. "What kind of signal?" Cal's voice lowered, filled with the same concern that echoed in Harris's heart. "It's another distress signal. But it's different this time. It's more specific. Someone is asking for help, and they know who we are." Harris's mind went into overdrive. The distress signals they'd received before had been random, vague. But this one was personal. Whoever was sending it knew about them, knew about the crew of the Vanguard. And that changed everything. "I'll take it from here," Harris said, her voice low but decisive. "Lian, get us to the planet. Kale, Rosa, prepare for anything. We don't know what we're walking into." As Lian worked quickly to reroute the ship's course, Harris felt the familiar weight of command settle on her shoulders. She had to make the right decisions, now more than ever. The universe was full of dangers, but this time, it wasn't just about survival. It was about facing the consequences of their actions. "We'll find out who's behind this," Harris said to herself, her eyes narrowing. "And we'll make them answer for what they've done."